So we're here to solve the Slitherlink star battle by Serkan. It's got some standard patterns that start, for instance, this 0, 3 next to each other, or even like this 0, 2, which has to have a diagonal cornering with another 0 on the right side of that 2. It only has one channel to come into the space. A lot of these spaces along the edges you can't come into, because I took, for instance, this edge or that edge, I couldn't get back out from this clue, and even 2 1s on a border, you can't come through the center of them. That's actually a pattern on both sides of the grid, so we can mark that in here. What it means is this has to come straight up through this spot, and that means we're going to take either the left or bottom edge of this one clue, not these edges. So we're going to have an edge here, an edge here. We can't come through this edge of this one clue, so we have an edge there. So this is, well, maybe subtle Slitherlink deductions. This is the first thing in the upper left corner. We've got these diagonal 3s, which put this in the grid. We've got these diagonal 3s, which put this into the grid. That even means something like we can't take these cells. If you took those cells, you would form that closed loop. So we got those markings in. Around this corner 1, we can't come into the corner directly with the left or bottom edge. And around this 3, we always have to take these vertical edges because of these adjacencies. We're forming an S or Z shape. So that means this end comes like this. We actually form this pattern. Got to have this end keep extending, this end keep extending. Around these diagonally adjacent zeros, we're going to have a single edge off of this one clue, and these ends will have to keep dodging each other as they come out. So still sort of staying apart as they move through the grid, get to here. We're not going to be able, even on this side of the grid, we saw the same thing on the left, sort of come into these spaces near the 1 very easily. If we came in here, we would get isolated. If we use this edge, we get isolated, so we have to take this edge. That now means we've got to take these around the space, but we also can't come near this diagonal 0. The 0, 1 has these ends always unused, so this has to loop around like so. We can't come into this corner near the 1, so we got to take the left or bottom side. Whichever of those we take, though, is going to be this pattern or this pattern, and both of those use this end coming out from the 2. We've got all these ends we can't use around the 0 for the 1, and the 0, 1 diagonal. I mean, also these ends can't be taken, so this one has just this option for it. And I think that's about it for the standard Slitherlink as we get started. There's a space where there is still a channel to come through this middle. You can see that this end and this end either both go out, and so keep an even count of ends in this upper left corner, or they would both stay in. So staying in would look like this and like this. And so this is where we're going to want to transition to star battle thinking. And actually, before going straight to marking stars in the grid, I'm going to start to color in cells I know are inside and outside the loop. Inside is going to be blue, and outside is going to be green. And every place we have an edge marked off with an X for the grid or an edge marked are the easiest places to start. And then once we start coloring in, places where we cross an edge boundary or where you're going to have a color change. So for instance, over here, got color changes in all these cells. And I think that's about all you can color immediately. But what it does set up is now as we think about stars, we've got some spaces like this first and second column as well as this first and second row where we've got a fair amount marked in green. So let's actually start with the first and second row. I can't put a star here because of what's marked in green, which means I can put actually a maximum of 1 star on the right side of the puzzle. Again, I can't put stars over where numbers go, so I got 1 star here. And that means in terms of cells I could put stars into, I could put a star in one of these 3 cells, at least 1 star in this 2x2 box. I could put a star in one of these 2 cells, and I put a star here. And notice that's exactly the count of 4 I need for this whole space, which means that these have to all be places I can put stars, including, for instance, for these 2 white cells, they have to be inside the loop. They're going to be the same color because they're on the same part of the loop. And so if a star goes into them, these have to be blue, which means I can shade the blue around them. It means I can shade these as forced colors. And recognizing that, there's a lot more of the loop I can draw in. I can draw all of this in. I can draw that this end has to wrap around. These 2 ends, one hidden, I guess, by the star node I've marked, have to dodge each other. So this comes like this. This end isn't going to want to go in to this space. I think that's a great start to the grid. And let's just catch up with a little more shading of what's inside and outside the loop. Now knowing those, And we didn't yet look at the first two columns, but this is a good time to do that for stars. Again, we've got one star that's potentially up in this 2x2 space. This is a second star. This would be a third star. This would be a fourth star. This is going to actually eliminate these two cells. So we've got to get a star here. Got two in this column, so this moves to the left, and this moves to the left. And any place of a star is inside the loop, so we can actually color that in. Moves this over here, makes this a clear outside cell. So some good progress doing these notations through the grid. We've got a few more places we can now think about, and let's just keep going in blocks of rows at a time. So let's look at the third and fourth rows now as another starting point. Got one star marked, which fulfills this space. We could get a second here, we get a third in one of these two cells, and get a fourth in one of these four cells. So these have to be the case where I've just made these notes. Let's actually go to the rightmost two columns. I've got a lot in green here. So I've got like one potential spot up top, which is touching where this note sits. This would be a second star. This would be a third star, and this would be a fourth star. So this has to come to the top here. And these two fulfill this column. So this note moves to the right, and this note moves to the right. But that all looks valid, and it gives me another space where I know I've got a cell now marked with a star that's inside the loop. So we can put this in, marks off this edge, closes this out. This two needs to take this edge and that edge, which marks this off. This one now has to take the bottom edge. It actually means this has to take the top edge of this next adjacent one clue. And that gives us a lot more interior cells, gives us these exterior cells. And that will get us the kind of next points of headway through the grid. It looks like one thing that's now going to mean is we've got some constraints in these next columns coming through because we moved a cell out of this column into the column to the right. So there's no star up here, so there's one star here. There could be a second, a third, and a fourth. Again, we can't use a green cell that's unmarked, and we can't use cells with numbers, so we only actually have these two cells and only these three cells as an example. Where this star is in one of these cells actually means this note moves over to the left, and that actually means these cells can't have stars. So in this column, no, 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 you've got just these four cells at the bottom for two stars, and that means this has to come over to the right, and that now puts another star in a sure cell, and a cell we can now force to be inside the grid, and that's going to give us some more Slitherlink steps to do right away. If this moves over like this 2 clue must take this top edge, but these loop ends need to stay apart. So this comes to the left, this comes to the top, marking all these off. This 2 comes here, comes over, this 2 comes to the left. These ends need to stay apart. So we get this pattern. One thing that's going to mean we now actually have a star that's on a border we just crossed. So if we actually put in the colors, we now know for sure. One thing that will do is actually immediately move this star. So the star has to be inside the loop, moves this star, which means this is inside the loop, moves this to the left, because this column is now finished. That now is going to do some other things. So where we actually start to mark some green and blues, we know, for instance, the loop does go here. The loop's going to have to turn here. And we can mark all of these cells in green because of where we've got X's. We can't draw an edge to separate those. And so where I just filled these two stars in to complete that row, I now have to get stars in the rows above and below. So in this row below it, I've got to get a star in one of these two cells. And in the row above it, I can't get a star anywhere until this cell. So this must be a star. And putting that in, we're actually going to see that we have marked off these positions. So this 3 comes straight down. And that actually means that this is outside, inside, outside, and that will force this star to the left, and it will force us to draw a boundary up here and over here. This has no space to kind of connect further up, so this has to come to the left, and because the 2 clue is now fulfilled, we've actually finished this part of the loop. We know for sure that this looks like this shape. These ends have to stay apart, and we'll have this pattern. We don't yet know what color this cell is, but we're probably going to be able to deduce it pretty soon by going back to thinking about stars. So let's do that. We put these 2 stars in to fill this row. So over here, we're going to need to have 1, 2 stars, and they can't be in these columns, so they come to the right, and they're going to cancel and be the same stars as the notes we had before that were in vertical spaces. That now means in this row just above that one, none of these cells can be used, so I've got 1, 2 cells that can be stars. That means for this note, it had to actually be in this cell, the last, because I just eliminated 2 of the 3 options. That means for this note, this has to go to the top. The top row now has 2 stars, so this comes down, and to left, this comes down. I've got all stars in these columns. Out to the 5th column, I need to put 1 more star. That's going to have to go here. Got all the stars there. This column needs to have 1 more star, but it's got to come down. This note also is going to have to come down. And I've got all the stars placed after I move this star down. So I've done the star battle side of this puzzle. I'm now going to need to finish the loop drawing, and that loop drawing is going to come from considering how these ends will go. Let's first mark this in, mark these in. These are in the same color, so I can't go across these edges, but I can go across this edge, so that's what I'm going to have to do. Get the space in green. The key constraint looks to actually be that these ends need to stay apart. And notice that the tension is going to come from these ends closing. If this closes, then this loop end has to come down, and however these go, these loop ends are going to come back together. So what I can't do is take this vertical space. I've got to take this horizontal space. This has to come over like this. I can't come into the space, and this is the last loop end. So we finish this grid, and we'll just color in the last cells for visual confirmation. So a tricky puzzle is maybe more long than hard, but it did require you to alternate between Slitherlink and Star Battle steps a lot and slowly chip in the first few rows, the first few columns, eventually just going from the right side, sets of rows together at a time, marking where the star notes go. You gradually force some cells to have to take stars. Those have to be inside the loop, and then that puts the next Slitherlink steps in the grid, and you just alternate between that to get through to the finish. So hopefully got a sense through this video, some good notation to track a variation like this, and also some tips and tricks for the future. We'll see you again soon.